Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we're talking about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fiction genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Vampire Diaries, Grimm, Sleepy Hollow, and Emerald City. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you don't want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include a time of when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you don't want to hear what I have to say about The Vampire Diaries, you can skip to what I had to say about Grimm, Sleepy Hollow, and or Emerald City. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of The Vampire Diaries. A lot of stuff came up in this episode. I kind of got an answer to something I posed in last week's episode, wondering, what's going to happen with Stefan's situation? Basically being human now. What would that mean for him getting his, being human again? Did that automatically turn on his humanity switch or not? And it seems that it did. It automatically becoming human automatically reinvigorates that humanity part of you. I know that was kind of interesting because I was wondering, it's like, maybe he'd end up being stuck as a human, but with his humanity switch being off. But it's like, no, he is, which is good. But like I said, because that could have easily took a dark turn of him still being the Ripper, but in a human form, he'd just be a human with a lust and need to kill. But the sucky thing for it is now he remembers it to the point is like he can't close his eyes without thinking about what he did to all those people, especially Enzo, because it's like Bonnie's a friend and he took the person that she loves away from her. And then also he looking at his hands, he's still got Enzo's blood on his hands, and it's too much. I mean, then also gets arrested, which Stefan didn't put up too much fight with because it's like he knows he deserves it because all those people he killed, because his fingerprints are all over that hospital where all those people he killed. Because even Caroline later on, I mean, she helps him out and everything. I figured someone was going to do it and basically made it all disappear, which, on some level, that's got to make Stefan feel even worse. It's because it's like he's getting away for all the bad stuff that he's done. It's like he's not facing true punishment. But the thing is, Damon was like, it's better that Stefan be locked up right now, because at least that way he's around, even if it's cops, he's around somebody, because it's like in a situation like this, the last thing you want is Stefan by himself, especially now that he's human. I'm sure there are plenty of times back in his, like, anytime he's come off a Ripper binge that he's always wanted to kill himself, but probably just could never go through with it. It's like probably even more so now as a human, because it's like it's a lot easier to kill yourself. I mean, there was an easy way to kill yourself as a vampire, but it's even easier probably as a human. But like I was saying, it's like he's almost getting away with all he did as, a Ripper, killing all those people. Caroline's like, no, you did that because of Cade and everything. But the sad thing is, that wasn't Cade's work. That was just him being a Ripper. Like, sometimes you could argue, being like, no, the fact is, Cade put him in that position, wanted him to turn off his humanity to do this job. But at the same time, it's like, it was Stefan who decided to turn off his humanity, knowing what it would do. But mainly that's because of what Cade, like, it's just a lot of stuff built onto each other. It's like, I mean, because that's what makes it harder about this whole situation. It's like all the people he hurt, plus he hurt a friend of his the most. And that, because like I said, it's kind of the same situation with the bell, forcing Matt to ring the bell. That wasn't a siren. That wasn't Cade. That was just Stefan himself. And even all these deaths, that's because Stefan couldn't control his Ripper urges, so he was literally ripping people apart. And he just having to confront that. That, because that's always Stefan's thing, like when he goes on those binges, like always remember all the people he's killed, so he's learning their names and it's hitting him. And the question is it hitting him as hard as it would before? Because as a vampire, your emotions are heightened, but he's no longer a vampire, so it probably doesn't hit him. Obviously, it hits him hard, but I think emotionally it won't hit him as hard as it would have if he was a vampire, so. But, Stefan in his, because the biggest thing that Stefan pulled away from this episode is he's confused. He doesn't know what he wants to do, what he should do. He can't even think straight because everything's hitting him all at once and he just doesn't know how to make it right. Because, I mean, in his eyes, he's like, can I even make it right? The fact is that I'm going to hell no matter when it's all said and done. Like, even though I'm not a vampire anymore, the fact of the matter is what I've done cannot be erased. Because he went through the trouble of saving the lady. I think her name was Karen. She's the woman that he compelled her to basically, the whole Bonnie's home situation, sign over the deed to him and over to her and everything to get into Bonnie's house, and then he almost killed her. Luckily, he didn't, because I mean that you could tell it broke his heart because he saw her daughter there, and it's like, oh yeah, my mom's the only person I have left in this world. It's like we only have each other. And so he wanted to do something right. But, because but Caroline had to be like, don't give up. it's easy to want to give up, and it's understandable why he want to give up. But it's like the fact of the matter is, you have this life. You know, you're a human now, so you might as well take this opportunity to spend the rest of your life at least trying to get some form of redemption. Which even brings it up to Damon. He's like, "Yo, Damon, do you actually think there's redemption?" You know, but Damon kind of knows there isn't any because of what he had. He even brought it up to Kate. He's like, "So, has he ever heard of anyone kind of getting out, working their way back?" You know, kind of redeem himself to the point that they can kind of get out of hell. And then Kate's like, well, I don't want to give you false hope. But it seems like that's what he's doing for his bro. So it's a sad situation because, like, obviously Damien puts a lot of weight on himself because he's like, you know, all this is his fault. He dragged in his brother. He kind of got, you know, everything happened because of him. You know, and like I said, it's sad because all this started because Damien was trying to do the right thing. And it just, you know, led him getting captured by the siren, which led to Enzo getting captured by the siren as well. And it's just them doing everything, then making a deal with Kay, getting his brother involved. It's just one thing stacked on top of another, and just Damon's trying his best to make it up. Which, you know, Rick is back in town. Rick is still pissed at Damon, even to the point Damon's like, dude, I have to get the journal because Kate's like, if I hand him that book, he won't kill Stefan. Because basically, and it's something I've never even thought about, like, there was a loophole out of this deal the entire time. Cade's deal was the fact is to have two vampire brothers serve as his servants. Well, the fact of the matter is, Stefan is no longer a vampire. He's a human now, so it kind of null and voids basically the contract, because it's like, that's what he needed for the contract. His side of what he needed is no longer possible because, like, you know, it fell through. So they technically found a loophole. Like, it's kind of the loophole they were probably looking for the entire time. Who knew it'd kind of work out this way? But it still doesn't stop the fact is that Cade's like, well, the fact of the matter is, your brother's soul is still mine, because he's going to hell nevertheless. Even if he's human, he's still going to hell, and his soul is going to be mine. I could easily kill him tonight. You know what? I'm going to do that. You have until midnight. Bring me a journal, I won't kill him. And it's basically a Maxwell journal, and the reason why he wants it is because basically one of Matt's distant ancestors apparently had a connection with the Bennett witches. Essentially, back in the day, he crossed paths with Selene and Sybil, and because this is back when Kay took an interest in the bell. The reason why he wanted the bell was because he knew it would be a way for him to come back to this world. Hence, the whole reason why he's here now is because the bell rung 11 times, and that let him come back. I mean, he was able to kind of rip through the hole, step through, and make his way here. Still, the question is it permanent? I assume it is permanent because he hasn't had to go back yet. He just kind of pops up whenever he wants to. So I assume it is kind of a permanent situation. Like, the fact is, the hole just probably had to be big enough. Like, obviously, he can psychically bring himself anywhere, but even that's probably had its own limit. Well, it had its limitations because he couldn't be there in person. But nevertheless, we got a little more background about how those witches and everyone died. Essentially, Sybil and Selene got inside of the Maxwell, I think his name's Ethan, got inside of his head, basically made him ring the bell. Bonnie's ancestor used her magic, well, her and the other witches used their magic to hold back the hellfire. They basically took the hellfire upon themselves, and they all died with the exception of Bonnie's ancestor, as a way of protecting what will eventually be Mystic Falls. If it wasn't already Mystic Falls at that time, you know. They might not have actually established a name for the town at the time. But nevertheless, the journal, it was Maxwell's only way of saying how to kill Cade, because the sirens made it so that he couldn't say, like, oh, this is how you kill Cade or whatever. Like, he couldn't even tell them about the bell. He could write it down, though, hence the whole journal situation, which Damon gave to Cade as a means of being like, hey, leave my brother alone, which Cade immediately deals with by burning, obviously. But obviously, you know, there was some truth to it then. If Cade is so afraid to the point he would try and get rid of anything that could reference a way of killing him. So there had to be truth to it. But obviously there's a weapon. It's kind of like a blade that was left behind by Cade, and it's kind of forged from the same fires. It's kind of, my understanding, it kind of went, I didn't catch all of it because I'm an idiot, so I kind of miss on detail. But I wasn't 100% sure if they were talking about the fact that the blade was some kind of, has some connection to Cade and his world, hence the reason why it can be used to kill him. I could be 100% wrong on that, but if you did catch that, do let me know in the comments down below, like, more about that whole blade situation, because I didn't really catch that. I mean, but even Damon's not 100% sure, because I felt like there had to be a reason why he handed the journal over. Obviously, to save Stefan, but also had to be like, he had to have pulled something from that before. I was like, but the fact of the matter is, because I was like, there's no way he could have, because if he did, Cade would have been able to read his mind or something. It's like, so not unless it was could be a situation where you have Damon kind of compelling himself to forget or something like that. Could it be something like that? But it's like, no. So I was like, because I was like, there's no way you'd be able to hide the fact is that he read the journal. So, but this is him just kind of taking an educated guess. It's based on basically the fact is that Sybil, ran her mouth a lot. So she kind of let that slip and everything. So, which is to a circumstance that even he was like, yo, so we're kind of like, hey, Rick, let's go get drunk and basically make kind of half-ass apologies to one another. Like I say, it's kind of interesting because this is like Alaric and Damon's first time seeing each other subsequently since everything. Like, since Damon kind of coming back, getting his humanity back and everything. Like I said, Rick has the right to be mad and everything because the fact is that, he, more so than anything, obviously there's a Tyler situation, but it's also the fact is that he kidnapped his daughters and that's something he can't forgive. I mean, he still never really forgave Celine for that. I mean, granted, it's not like, she turned out to be a lot more selfish. I wanted to kind of give her the benefit of that. Like I said, because of that whole storyline of her being like, trying to be like Stefan and trying to make amends for it. But it's like, nope, that she completely abandoned that. And then it was just kind of like, nope, I'm a bad guy because I'm trying to kill my sister. And it's like, if I end up killing my sister and killing everyone else in town, well, so be it. And it's like, that sucks. The question is, like, if it was there, why didn't any of them ever take the opportunity to kill Cade? Maybe it's a circumstance where it's like Cade wasn't actually in this world. Well, that was kind of the whole point, was to kind of get Cade to this world so they could kill him. Was kind of the original point, I think, was what they were saying. Because, like, obviously Maxwell knew a way to kill him, but Bonnie's ancestor was kind of like, no, we're not actually going to bring the devil here to Earth. So it's probably a situation where they never really got an opportunity to really test that out. I mean, especially because by the time Cade came to this world himself, he'd already killed both of them. So it's not like they would have had time to warn anybody about that, because it's like, as long as Cade is in his other world, there's no way the weapon really would have worked. But even if that was the case, it seemed like Sybil and Celine were more concerned about using the bell on one another. Well, more so Celine was more concerned about using it on Sybil. Like I said, the whole plan should have been try to kill Cade, but I mean, the bell probably doesn't work on him while he's in the other world. And even then, it's like, there's such a huge drawback to using it, because it will kill everyone within a certain radius. It will burn them. And as we also see, it burns him with hellfire, but it's like he's completely immune to all fire. So it's kind of like, obviously, that's not going to work. So it kind of takes you back to the square one about this whole Cade situation. Like I said, I'm bouncing all around the episode, but obviously at the end of the episode, we saw the return of Kai, and it's like, wait, what? You're alive and everything. Oh, wait, what? And then it kind of popped in my head, like this whole Bonnie situation, which we got a little more perspective on. I was thinking Bonnie created her own world just like Cade did. No, what she did is she basically did what the Bell did. Like, her grief was so powerful because she is a psychic, whereas he created his world, she kind of punched a hole through it. And that's what that's about. That's what I'm thinking. That's how Kai's alive, because he squirmed his way out, because like the hole is still open because it was left open because of the pain she felt, that psychic pain she felt in her heart, like being activated, like, this isn't to say this is Bonnie's first time ever losing someone, but this is like the first time it's ever broken her like this. And she ended up psychically breaking through to Cade's hell, and I'm guessing that's how Kai got out, which obviously there's someone who kidnaps Stefan near the end of the episode, which I can only assume that's the same situation there too. Makes you wonder, could this be an opportunity for Lily to come back too? I mean, if because obviously this is like, supernatural. I mean, who's to say who's there? I mean, this might be even an opportunity for Georgie to come back. I don't, probably whoever is near that hole, that Bonnie left open, is like probably took that opportunity. I mean, granted, it's hard to say whether it's closed now or not, because Bonnie's mom can't pop up to help her, because it's like, obviously Bonnie's kind of shutting everyone out and wants to be on her own, but she's hearing Enzo's voice calling out to her. And she's like, no, she has to help him, gotta reach in there. It's like she broke a hole in it, in there. Basically, she can pull him out, and her mom's like, no. The fact is, that's a very dark place, and the darkness is reaching out and trying to grab you and pull you in. And and she brings up a good point. Like, Enzo wouldn't do something where he knows that it would cost Bonnie her life, even if it meant bringing himself back to her. Like, he's not that selfish because he put her needs before his own any day because he loved her that much. But, maybe that was him whispering to her, trying to get her attention, not to call him back, but to warn her about what was coming or who is coming. Like I said, because there's a lot of things, it's kind of like, I know I'm kind of crossing boundaries again. It's kind of like the Lucifer situation. It's like Lucifer's not there to guard him. I'm talking specifically the show Lucifer, not just supernatural Lucifer. But it's like, you're not in hell, so things kind of go a little wacky. You're supposed to be there to kind of guard things. It's like, well, that's Cade's hell, so it's like, obviously he's not there anymore. Does he even keep an eye on that place? Does he even, you would think he would probably know about the whole Bonnie situation, but he didn't bring it up. He didn't seem concerned or anything, so it's probably something because he's not there. It's kind of a thing on its own. Unless he's actively there, he can't, sense or even notice any changes to him. That's going to be really interesting. That's the only thing I can assume is because of that psychic hole she left in his world is the reason why Kai's back, and like whoever it was that took Stefan. Obviously, it's probably someone we know from the past. Someone that's popped up in the show before. What was that dude that was with Lily? Is it Julius or Julian? The dude from like last season, The dude who was originally sealed in, what was it, the Phoenix Stone or whatever? Something else that crossed my mind too. Now that, I feel like that would probably be one of the first things Damon asked about. Now that Kai is back, maybe he can be the one to reverse the spell on Elena because he's the only one that kind of really knew. Because he said there was no loopholes, but that's only because he's dead and out of the way. But probably even Kai himself can't fix it, but I'm sure that's going to come up in conversation. He probably brought it up before he died and everything. Like, oh yeah, the fact is that he can cure it. He can't cure it because it's like once it's activated, it's activated. Because that could be somewhere where this goes at the end too. It's like, oh, Bonnie gets to live out the rest of her life. Granted, it's hard to say where that's going to be, where it's now she has to deal with the fact that she can't spend that time with Enzo. Plus, this could be an opportunity for, Elena to come out. Like I say, if it works out like that way, Kai might be like, oh yeah, the fact is I'll do that only if you help me kill Cade. So it's like, oh, only thing you got to do to get your girl back, and have her back is to kill the devil himself. So, because the fact is, like, it's kind of something I was wondering about, because Stefan was trying to find the right words to say to Bonnie, and I was wondering how that was going to work. I was like, okay, so Stefan's going to go to Bonnie, and I was like, things aren't going to work out, are they? She's going to be super pissed. Like I said, I brought it up last episode, and I'm still wondering if that still could possibly be true. Could Bonnie end up becoming like Cade? It took an emotional, psychic outburst to kind of make him what he is now, and it's like, well, Bonnie just kind of went through that, and maybe she will, she can't let Enzo go. She does have that's kind of the whole point of her mom burning Enzo's body so that Bonnie could just let go of him. But the fact is she still has a necklace full of his blood, so it's like, what does that mean? Will she turn herself into a vampire? Because the fact is she doesn't have her magic back, but maybe if she channels enough of this psychic energy, kind of, rather than, because even their psychic energy kind of acts as magic on its own, and as you can see, like, what the sirens kind of tapping is too is magic too. So it's like, maybe that'd be her way of getting her magic back. I don't know. We just kind of have to wait and see. Like, it just crazy episode with a lot of stuff happening, and so interested to see where it all goes from here. And now moving on to this week's episode of Grimm. This week's episode dealt with a very interesting vessel known as the Alp. Essentially, it's kind of a vessel that basically eats your sleep. In particular, it's like melatonin that basically gets released when you're a deep sleeper, or from the fact is that when you don't get a lot of sleep, it gets like kind of released in your brain, and this thing kind of feeds off of it, and essentially it kind of drives people crazy. It's kind of interesting how it works, because it's also in reverse, because the Alf itself can actually go crazy if it doesn't eat enough, but once it starts eating and feeding off the melatonin of someone, it kind of drives him crazy. In particular, the guy in this episode, his name is Dan, basically kind of snapped. He would board up his windows and his doors, but it wouldn't do him any good, because it somehow managed to get inside of his room at this hotel, and he ended up murdering this dude just because the dude was like, oh, you need to get some sleep. He was like, oh, you want me to go sleep? Oh, you're with the monster. So he beat him up. There was a moment I thought was kind of interesting. There was a moment where they were in obviously Nick and Hank were interrogating him, and he kind of snapped a little bit just because he was remembering the Alp and everything, and it flipped out, and he was flipping out, and then like you had Nick calling for some, basically for some chemical, some drugs to kind of calm him down, and he ended up pushing Nick away and headbutting Hank, and in one moment you see Hank just turn around and knock him out, and then Nick's just kind of like, okay, that can work too. Wasn't expecting that. That just came out of nowhere. It's like Hank got hit, bam, bam, and knocked him out. I don't know. And there was no words about it. Just all you heard was what Nick said, and it was just like, okay, that worked. And it was done. There's even one lady in particular who ended up killing herself over it just because she was trying to run down the stairs and ended up flipping over the stairs and falling to her death. Obviously, they ended up, trying to catch it in the act by using Monroe as bait. I always feel bad for Monroe. I mean, it was a situation where it was like, Rosalie was like, no, I don't want Monroe to do this, because that was kind of the point. Remember that conversation her and Monroe had earlier about the kind of dangers of being around Nick, not only because he's a cop, but also he's a Grimm, so it's like doubly dangerous to be around him. And you kind of coincide that with the fact is that Monroe has always kind of been the go-to like bait for those type of situations. Like, oh, don't worry, Monroe, we'll get there just in time. We'll be there in time to save you and everything. So it's the whole concern. They're starting a family and everything. So obviously it's going to lead to like them being a little more cautious going forward. I mean, Monroe and Rosalie always are, but even more so now. So, but the fact is they had to dump him full of melatonin. Well, Rosalie did, and basically got him super sleepy, so he had to sleep at the hotel and be bait. Got paralyzed and everything, because that's how this thing works too. This thing, I can't place it. It kind of reminds me of a monster from a video game, and I just can't quite place it. What the Alp looks like. It has a very interesting design. The fact is, it kind of not paralyzes you with its bad breath, but I like the way it has that mouth it has. Kind of like I don't know whether it be an octopus or a squid. I think I'm thinking of a squid. You know what? No. Mouth-wise, it kind of reminds me of the Kraken, in particular from Pirates movies. It's not really worth getting into. But it's like some monster in particular it kind of reminds me of, and I just can't place it. Is it one of the monsters from the Amnesia game? I don't know. Nevertheless, it's not important. What I thought was kind of interesting when it was all said and done, obviously they found out like, the Alp was getting through the house through the building from some tunnels behind some dressers and stuff like that, and ended up coming across a manager. I'm like, oh, so the manager is totally the way he was getting all suspicious and locking up, and it's like, oh no, the manager wasn't an Alp. He was actually a different Vesson altogether. He attacked him, and Nick just snapped his neck so easy. It was such a like, yep, it happened and it's done already. I was like, oh, you couldn't knock him out or anything, because it's hard to say where he lies in all this situation. Maybe he was doing some shady stuff on his own, the reason why he was attacking them like that. I mean, obviously seeing Nick look at him, obviously he knows about the whole Grimm situation, so I'm sure that played a contributing factor, but it was just like, what was his part to play in this? Was he supplying food for the Alp? He was trying to protect the Alp? Because obviously from the very beginning he seemed very suspicious, but I can only assume that was the case. But we ended up finding out the Alp behind all of this was the lady who runs the place. She's the one who kind of owns that particular hotel and everything. And she's like, do you understand like all the pain I'm going through? It's like, the fact is that I can't sleep. But she can't sleep because if she doesn't feed off other people's sleep, she can't sleep herself. It's just kind of, like I said, kind of the huge downside of being that Vesson. But Nick was like, okay, I'm going to give you two choices. One, you could sell this place and give the proceeds to some homeless shelters, to house homeless people. And she's like, well, what's the other choice? And he's like, or, you said it yourself, I am a Grimm. And so we could settle this right here and right now. And like, cause you're an Alp and it's not like no one's going to miss you. And it's just, he says it with such a dead serious look on his face. And she's like, okay, fine. I was like, all right. I was like, wow. I was giddy. I was like, yeah, going all badass like that. Nick is like, okay. And she's like, fine, I'll sell the place. Turns around, getting ready. She's walk away, and she vogues and tries to attack them. Like, Nick moves out of the way and she bashes her head on her dress. I was like, okay. Wasn't expecting things to kind of work out like that. I would go as far as saying almost anticlimactic. It was weird that it just kind of played out like that. Now, what's even weirder is the very ending of this situation where we have like the guy, his name was Charles Lynx, so sure that he was going to be the Alp, because he was always in a hallway, and just every time you turn around and look down the hallway, he's just sitting there, kind of creepy. But he vogues at the end of the episode, and he's laughing like relentlessly, and it's like one or two things. One, he's basically been just a regular Joe Blow vested that was trapped there. Because basically, I mean, essentially, they were saying like basically there's been some weird and shady stuff going on at that particular motel for a couple many years. So I can only assume maybe that guy in particular, the manager, maybe he has something to do with some of those suspicious deaths and stuff like that. Maybe it has something to do with I mean, because the fact is, the lady didn't look as old, because it seemed like the reason why it was looking like it might be Charles Lynx is because like he's an older gentleman, and because a lot of suspicious stuff at the end has been happening for like a good couple decades, and the manager, she didn't look that old. I mean, not like she was doing it from a young age or whatever, but I mean, who's to say? So maybe a lot of that stuff might have been done by the manager, hence why he was kind of quick to attack during the whole circumstances. But nevertheless, the fact is that old guy was like that. Maybe he was being held back by the Alp, and the moment that Alp was dead, it kind of freed his mind and he was okay. I mean, granted, we never got to see what Dan was like afterwards, like, probably be able to kind of get a good night's sleep for once, but it's kind of like, I don't know whether dying will completely cure them. So is that what that's about? Or is that Alp the only thing keeping him in check, that he's some great powerful vessel that's going to cause havoc and mayhem now? That was so unclear what that means. So it could either be either one of the two. Either he was just kind of held by it for so long and he was happy to be free of it, or he was being held by it, but now it's like, oh, he's actually a bad guy, and that's the only thing that was keeping him sedated, essentially. And then there's another thing that popped up in this episode, is the whole Sean and Meisner situation. Well, first, a guy from Black Claw shows up. He's like, oh yeah, Renard, we've been talking before. The fact is, I came here to continue what you started. The fact is, Bonaparte is dead, so now that Black Claw kind of side of like Portland's kind of been shut down, because there hasn't really been any Black Claw movement since Bonaparte, because him and anyone else associated with Black Claw is pretty much dead. I'm sure anyone else that might have backed that is kind of backing down because they know that Bonaparte is dead. So it's like, oh, the leader behind all of this is going. So it's like, oh, the Grimm killed him. Oh, let's not start any trouble, especially because the Grimm is a cop. So, but I assume, because there really hasn't been any Black Claw movement at all so far this season. So, especially because Black Claw was like ramping up like last season, big time ramping up. And so you would think, I don't know, because that's literally the big part of last season. Like, that's kind of the main antagonist and everything. So, but he's coming to be like, you know what, Sean? The fact is, we came here to kind of get things back in order, kill all these bad people, the Grimm and everyone else associated with him, kind of get them out of your way and everything. And Sean was like, you know what? Screw this. I'm done with you and Black Claw. You guys can probably eat it and just go. Then Meisner comes in and is like, you know what? The fact is, you're in danger. I think 2 people outside are trying to kill you. And it's like, okay. And then he ends up proceeding to kill, the guy that came to visit him as well as someone else. And that kind of gets to me. I'm like, so could this be him about to, because at first I was like, is this about to be Renard attacking someone invisible, or is this going to be him attacking someone thinking it's someone else just because he is legitimately going crazy? But then it's like, no, these people are outside. He takes one of them down. Meisner walks up to the other guy. Obviously, Sean's the only one who can see him. He waves his hands over the guy's eyes and messes him up. It's like, it was almost like, he had that look almost like sand was thrown in his eye. He could keep them open. Open his eyes up. Sean's in front of him and shoots him. And then he's like, so are we? And he's like, Meisner's like, the fact is, you didn't choose the right side before, but you chose the right side this time. Because obviously Sean is leaving this whole Black Claw thing behind. And he's like, so are you done? And Meisner kind of gave him a wave and disappeared. And I'm like, okay, so are we going to find out that, like, actually none of this happened and that Sean was just completely going crazy and Meisner's going to be back later on to mess with him? Or not? It's hard to say what that was, but the fact is, he had, like, if that really did happen, because I still don't know, because that's all that was. There was no more scenes of that later on, so it seems like it was just kind of a contained thing. So it's like, okay, so Meisner wiped his hands in front of the dude's eyes, and then they start flipping out. So that was some real stuff. That wasn't just in Sean's head. Whatever Meisner was, I don't know. So he was real to a certain degree, I'm guessing. I don't know. I hope we really get some answers to that. I mean, I guess it's kind of cementing the fact is that, hey, Renard's kind of a good guy again, possibly. I'm sure him and the others have kind of come to an agreement like, hey, we won't necessarily go back to the way we were, but we'll find a way to move forward. So I just hope we get more answers to that. I hope we end up finding out that the whole thing was inside of his head and that Meisner's situation isn't over. It's just kind of interesting that in that way. But the whole point was because, Renard was like, I'm done with this whole situation. Screw running for mayor again. Obviously, I've kind of, Nick basically shot me in the foot with this whole situation. So I can't, act upon it anyway. Plus, he's just like, I'm tired of it, because he does regret, because that whole Meisner situation kind of got in his head. I mean, arguably, you could literally think like, hey, maybe this whole situation with him going crazy was just his consciousness eating at him, that it basically manifested itself as Meisner, but it's all been him this entire time, his guilt. And so that he automatically assumed that those guys, maybe he saw something that told him those guys were going to attack him, and he did all that on his own. He acted fast or something. I don't know. All I can say is I don't know. And then finally, another part of the episode is back to the whole stick situation. Still haven't 100% figured that out, what that's all about. That's kind of another thing, too, since I'm on the subject of Sean, I'll kind of jump back. I'm really sorry about this. Is the fact that Sean brought up the fact that, oh yeah, Nick was supposed to survive. Nick survived somehow. Something great and powerful was protecting him. Kind of, obviously, he doesn't know about the stick, but he was referencing the stick. And wondering is, if that guy wasn't really killed by Sean in this episode, he might go off and blab about that whole thing to other Black Claw members. Like, it does make you wonder, is Black Claw going to, now that this guy's been dealt with, are there going to be other people to kind of step up, or is it like, because we still don't know where Black Claw stands, we still don't know where HW stands, where Trouble is and all of this, like, who runs HW at the very top of it all, who runs Black Claw at the top of it all. Like I said, we've met members here and there. Obviously, it seems like Bonaparte was like one of the top people. I mean, maybe he was like the top dude, but I'm sure there's more to it than that. I feel like if the top dude had dropped dead, like, things would be a lot more hectic. I feel like, it's probably a situation where, like, even if the top dude fell, there'd always be someone else to replace him, and the system would kind of be like self-contained, well, self-sufficient on its own, that it would basically keep going on with their whole beliefs and morals basically that it's time for Vestin to rise up. But going back to the point I kind of skipped from is obviously getting more into the stick and everything. Basically learning that some of these symbols are obviously, like, eventually they kind of piece it together that some of one of the symbols in particular is connected to is like a constellation called Pleiades or something. It's basically made up of these 7 stars that you're supposed to, I forgot what the whole thing behind it is that Monroe brought up, but essentially it's kind of like the constant number of 7, because there's 7 stars, there were 7 keys, there were 7 Grimm Crusaders, so it's just like, obviously 7's a lucky number. It's like, I think that's literally what they were saying in the episode. But basically, the symbols and everything kind of align with, like, kind of a map of the star system and everything. So basically, Rosalie ends up running a program on it, kind of looking through it and everything, and ends up finding out, it's like, because all of it ties into a calendar, from the Mayans to Sumerians, like, all these are different forms of the calendars. And so they end up kind of readjusting, kind of getting like an out. Basically, they need all the planets in kind of the rotation of the universe to kind of shape up, match up with the kind of coordinates that are basically the symbols take on the form of, and the symbols and stuff like that. God, I kind of just stumbled through that. But nevertheless, it turns out that basically all of it is specifically tied to a date. Obviously, you were thinking like it'd be a date to the past, but no, it all lines up perfectly for a day of the future. In particular, March 24th, which is like me wondering, is it like, what does that mean exactly? Apparently something big is supposed to be coming. That's what those symbols around the cloth around the stick and everything, it's pointing to a day in the future. They never said specifically 2017. I would assume so. Not less is because I feel like if it was some further date in the future date, I mean, especially this being the final season and everything, so it's got to be March of this year to kind of be like, oh, it's like right around the corner. Something, it's coming. It's been in preparation for a very long time that this was going to come. So maybe that's why the stick was buried, because the whole point was to talk about this thing that was coming. Maybe the stick is the key to figuring out this whole situation and dealing with whatever's coming. Maybe even Diana's connected to it, because the fact is that she can see the symbols and everything. Maybe she's part of some grand prophecy that she's supposed to kind of save the world or something. Maybe. Don't know. A lot of this is conjecture based on the stuff that we found. I mean, that's literally the biggest part of that. I brought it up once, just kind of, reiterate here. That's all I ever do with these. I'd run down the episode and I just bring up, I take the information and wonder, oh, could this be where that goes? Or maybe this is where that goes. Or maybe this means this, or maybe that means that, So I'm not 100% sure, so. But the fact is, for it to be hidden from something, with something so powerful, to be hidden away so well by, for so long, that it'd be obviously, you remember the original words that they read off of it last season were like, oh, danger or caution or something like that, dangerous. So obviously this is very, well, in fact, dangerous. So it does make you wonder, because to me, I was thinking oh, they're going to end up seeing it go back to solar system and everything and line up with some biblical time stuff, in particular Jesus, and I'm like, oh, could this wood stick be connected to the cross or something? I don't know. I mean, who's to say how old this thing is? Who's to say this thing popped up originally during the Crusade? Who's to say it hasn't predated them? Obviously, it's got all these different calendars from all these different civilizations, so it's definitely pretty old. What it is exactly, what it 100% does, who knows? Is it part of something bigger? Is it only a fraction of, maybe it was originally something else, but then this is the only piece of it survived, so that it's been passed down for generation after generation. Did this belong to anyone specific before, or is it just something that people did stumble upon and it just came to the Crusaders to kind of seal it away so that no one would have access to it? What is so scary about this stick? Obviously, we've seen its power and its draw, especially what it's done to both Eve as well as what it has done to Nick. So overall, very good episode. It just seems to brought more questions, obviously. So, and now moving on to this week's episode of Sleepy Hollow. In this episode, we had the team going to Sleepy Hollow. And sadly, it wasn't what I kind of wanted, and I kind of figured it wasn't going to be like that. I figured as much, but nevertheless, I still was hopeful for it, but it turned out not to be the case. But still doesn't change the fact that it was a really good episode. I brought up how much it affected Crane and everything being back, but I forgot just how much it would affect Jenny, too. I mean, because Sleepy Hollow was a big place in her life, too. I mean, obviously for Crane, it was a new start for him, just this new brand new world. Plus he lost a lot of things and a lot of people over the course of his, time in Sleepy Hollow. But also Jenny lost Joe and she lost Abby. So it's kind of, I mean, it takes its toll on her into the, because obviously she, at first she kind of acts like she's all okay. That she's like, oh man, I love, it's just there's some ghosts here, but some good ghosts, because basically it reminds her of, especially because they go to the, I forgot what they call it, where they go to do their research and everything. Obviously, it's they have not been back here subsequently. I mean, I don't know if Jenny has, but definitely Crane hasn't been back down there. It just kind of makes them nostalgic, just all the times that they work together trying to solve things, so. But like I said, she acts like everything's okay, but there's points in the episode where it's she's pushing the others away, in particular Alex and Jay, going oh, the fact of the matter is you're kind of acting like this is all fun and games and everything. You need to take this a little more seriously. You could be dead or worse, because there are things out there worse than death, kind of trying to scare them away. And even at one point trying to deal with the situation, the Sphinx situation all its own, which I thought that was kind of interesting. We'll get to that in a second, but. At first they're yo, we know what obviously you've lost, you've been through some stuff, but the fact is we're here, we might not be the best at this yet, but, it's a learning curve. We're going to get better at it, and we have our reasons for being here and trying to be part of this battle and everything, so don't cut us out. We're part of this team and everything. And then Jenny was you're 100% right. This is just me dealing with my own stuff. You're right. I shouldn't cut you out of it. And it's like I said, it's understandable. She doesn't, from the very beginning, the reason why she does stuff on her own is because she doesn't want to get other people involved. She's already lost a lot of people that she cares about that got caught up in this whole war of good versus evil, and she doesn't want that to happen to them either, especially because they're so new to this. It's she doesn't want this life that was kind of forced upon her and her family and Crane. She doesn't want that life to be forced onto them too. So it's just kind of, but it's a situation where it's if she has to handle it herself, she would rather do that than drag other people in it. Partially because it's we're the amateurs, and she probably doesn't have 100% faith in their ability, but it's also because it comes from a good place in her heart where she's just trying to protect them. So, but obviously I just brought it up. The fact is that one of the main things they were dealing with in this episode was a Sphinx. It does not appear to be, even Diana calls it out. She's like, wait, isn't a Sphinx supposed to be like half human, half animal? And obviously messes with your head about riddles. And it's like, well, maybe in their own way, apparently the Egyptians anamorphize a lot of stuff. I guess that's why, like, you take, for example, Anubis. I guess, like, Anubis took on a form of, like, he's a god, but, he's like a dog god. So I'm assuming it's kind of something similar to that, because basically saying, like, well, maybe their representation of the Sphinx as being half human, half creature, maybe that's just because it was their way of kind of warning that, hey, the Sphinx is actually a demon guard dog. I mean, obviously not a dog, but just a person. It's just a demon in general, so... And I don't know. Like, I guess because kind of along with Diana's misconceptions, like I always thought the Sphinx was kind of a neutral thing. I didn't really think it was more. I don't know. I've never thought a demon, maybe some supernatural creature, but never really would have exactly thought demon. And now that I'm thinking about it, kind of really trailing back a little bit, the whole Joe situation, kind of speaking of him. Thought it was kind of interesting. I was wondering if we'd ever find out what happened to him. It's like, oh, no, Joe's fine. He was basically put in like a block of something that Dreyfus broke him out of. Now, something kind of crossed my mind during this whole situation. Well, multiple things. So, okay, because I don't know where to start because I'm going to be connecting so many dots here. First of all, the fact is that Joe is so easy to work with when it comes to Dreyfus. Obviously, this is all part of their contract. It's like, obviously, the original contract is like, hey, I get your soul when this is all said and done, when you die and everything. But at the same time, it's like, he's so willing to help Dreyfus try to get immortality. I'm like, so because it brings up, like, doesn't that contradict your contract and everything? So why would you want to do that? And so my only thought process is, I mean, obviously it's part of the contract where it's like, well, no matter what the case may be, it's like they signed a contract together. If he finds a loophole around it, he finds a loophole around it. So I don't care. It's like, I mean, probably a situation where it's like, oh, if he ends up dying along the way, cool. But it's like, I feel like as a demon and the whole soul thing, it's like you be wanting him to kind of mess up. But like I said, maybe the contract is very binding and it's just like, well, since I'm stuck here doing it, I might as well just, because, stay by his side and everything. It's like, oh yeah, thanks for coming to get me, sir. It's like, oh yeah, I know I'm supposed to stay by your side. I'm sorry. Like a butler or something, like kind of a loyal butler or something. Kind of like he's Batman and Dreyfus is Batman and Joe is Alfred type of situation. But like going back to what I was saying, like the only explanation I can think of is because to use the Philosopher's Stone calls for a sacrifice. For the fact is that Dreyfus wants to be immortal, it would mean costing the lives of a lot of people. In particular, in this case, the lives of everyone in Sleepy Hollow, if not more. So I'm assuming maybe he's like, well, he'll help Dreyfus out because if he goes through with this, all those people will be dead and their souls will be Joe's to reap. So it's kind of like, why take one soul? We could take many. Never really was explained, but that's one possibility. Once again, probably most likely just like it's part of the contract. He's a demon, kind of has to go along with this contract. I don't know. I'm curious to see how that works out. But nevertheless, like kind of going along those same lines is the Headless Horseman too. Is like, why would you work with Dreyfus? Like, obviously doing what he needs to do. Maybe it's because it's like, well, even if you're going to do what you're going to do with the whole Philosopher's Stone and try and gain immortality, is it a circumstance of like, hey, I know, it isn't going to affect me. Obviously, you need me to be part of the spell. So as long as it means I get to kill Crane afterwards, I'm fine. Because it's like, to me, you're not really getting anything out of this. Not unless Dreyfus promised him something after like gaining immortality. I mean, one might be killing Crane or the other one might be something else. Because I was also thinking like, oh, maybe they're actually sacrifices for the spell too. But it doesn't seem like, obviously it didn't completely 100% go through, but I'll get to that in a second. Or maybe it did, because obviously that area was protected so that none of them were affected by this whole like, the Philosopher's Stone sucking up souls. But it seems that, I don't know, the only thing I can think of is like he was promised he'd be able to kill Crane afterwards. It's like, okay, let me use Crane when I need, get my immortality, and he's all yours to kill. So maybe that's why. That's the only reason I could see for him being so willing to help with his circumstances, because it did seem like, he was like, oh, I can help you get out of J Street, but I need your help for something. It seems like this is what it was about. Well, the thing we ended up finding out, because Diana ended up finding out quite a bit about Crane in this episode. Specifically, the fact is that he didn't know he was a witness. That apparently a lot of people knew about him being a witness, but didn't tell him anything. And, I guess in a sense, you can almost look at Diana being almost happy about her circumstances. She might not be happy about Molly being a witness. It took them a little while, but they were very upfront about it. The fact is, Crane didn't find out he was a witness until he died, and much later on. So it was a secret everyone kept from him, not just Washington, even Benjamin Banneker, who popped up in this episode, because Banneker was the one who came up with the decision and the plan to basically break up the Philosopher's Stone in different pieces and have it scattered everywhere. Well, it turns out that Washington used it once before it was broken up. And at first you're kind of like, oh, what was that use? Turns out that use was the battlefield where Crane and the Horsemen of Death fell. He basically set it up because he wanted Crane and the Horsemen to fight there, because on top of the Philosopher's Stone, the Horseman is actually, he can be killed. Hence why. Because even Dreyfus is like, haven't you wondered why the fact is you were able to kill the Horsemen of Death back then? Well, yeah, the Horsemen of Death back then, but subsequently you haven't been able to hurt him or stop him subsequently. Have you wondered why? And it's like, that's the reason why. Because in that moment he was vulnerable. And basically them fighting on top of that would mean Crane would be sacrificing himself, which Benjamin was completely against, because Banneker's like, the fact is, he's our witness. He's the witness. And it's like, you're willing to sacrifice him in a battlefield? And Washington's like, I know how you feel. The fact is, Crane is someone that I trust more than anyone, and he's a loyal soldier. But the fact of the matter is, this has to be done. There's no extra moves left to play. It's like, this has to be made now, or we may not win this war. Which, yes, Crane's sacrifice paid off in the end, and it led to them being able to win the war and everything. But still, that's kind of one of their key people could have been taken. The person meant to... I mean, it's kind of something that Crane kind of takes with a grain of salt, because it's like, well, it did have its benefits. I mean, he understands why Washington did it, because even Diana's kind of like, oh, that's kind of interesting how, like, oh, the subject comes up about whether he's pissed off about it or not, or how he feels about it, and he quickly changed it to kind of be like, oh, we don't have to worry, well, Molly won't have to worry about such a thing. She won't have to worry about being a soldier. She's like, oh, nice job just kind of changing the subject like that. But it seems like more so than anything, he's like, at the very least, it brought him this team. So there are benefits. There may be very unorthodox. It led to him dying and everything, but at the very least, he wouldn't have had the experiences he's had over the course of the series and met the people he's met if it wasn't for things playing out the way they did. So there was benefit to it. So it was kind of a gamble that Washington had no choice but to make. So I guess really it's determined by what exactly you do with the Philosopher's Stone. It determines the sacrifice needed. I guess a bit part of the sacrifice with their whole situation was possibly, would have been a situation where it could have absorbed their souls or something. Because I was wondering, I was like, isn't that a big gamble to make? Because wouldn't that absorb the souls of everyone on the battlefield? But it's like, no, for that particular case, it's just meant for battle purposes to give Crane the strength needed to take down the Horseman in that moment, to kind of put him in kind of a cryostasis, much like Crane was. So, because at first I'm looking at it, I'm like, he kept saying, oh, don't you recognize it? I'm like, oh, is it supposed to be where Crane kind of awoken? Which I'm sure that's kind of like, because basically the whole ritual took place in the same area where him and the Horseman fell all those years ago. So I don't know, that was kind of an interesting callback. Like, it's something that was way back in the series, and it's like, it's kind of what was essentially the start of all of this, and it's like, did they make much of it? Because to me, the only thing that crossed my mind was like, obviously Katrina had her spell enacted. Maybe because she knew about Crane being a witness and everything. She probably knew about Washington's plan, so that's in that moment, she was like, I mean, that's probably why it worked in the first place, is because Katrina interfered and it played out with them both being connected to each other like that. So, I don't know, like I said, it's just kind of interesting. It was something minute like that. Like, obviously a lot of stuff is open-ended, so you can easily go back and add details to it, like add, context to certain situations. It's like, it's like, obviously it never came up, but it's like, obviously it doesn't interfere with what was already done. So that's kind of, it's a really good thing I appreciate about Sleepy Hollow. I'm trying to think over the course of the series, I don't think they've done it a lot. This is like one example of it. I mean, it's a very good example. So I think they did a very good job about doing how they went about that. Obviously, when it was all said and done, they blew up the Philosopher's Stone. The Horseman is going, and obviously they couldn't find Dreyfus, but it turns out, obviously, he pops up at the end of the episode, because before the bomb went off, he got some of the liquid in his mouth from the Philosopher's Stone, and there were some people dead around the place. I can only assume those were some of his people, so it did kind of go through. Granted, it does make you wonder how pure is this immortality, like, because it was supposed to take the souls of thousands of people just to give him immortality, but it seems like only a few people who got their soul sacrificed. So is it a circumstance of like, oh, his immortality is only shortly, I mean, because it seems like he can heal from wounds immediately, like obviously he has shrapnel in his side, pulled it out, and then he looks down and it's immediately healed. But that's why I'm wondering, like, or because the Philosopher's Stone is destroyed now, so there's no like, oh, not unless he can piece it back together, but even then I'm like, I don't know. I'm very curious to see how this whole immortality situation plays, and also about what about Joe? Last time we saw him, Joe was captured by Ginny. Now, whether or not he stays captured or not is kind of another story. So I don't know, because maybe he actually got away during the explosion. Because it seems like seems to be the case. Now, whether he's kind of returned to hell or whether he's still kind of roaming free. I mean, because their contract is kind of up now that Dreyfus has become immortal. I'm sure it kind of nullifies the contract, so maybe he went back to hell or something. I don't know. Maybe we'll possibly see him pop up in the future. Because I was wondering, like, part of my brain was almost about to go, like, well, what does this mean going forward with the series? It's like, well, if Dreyfus is taken care of, doesn't that kind of remove him as the main antagonist? Like I said, I mean, I don't even think we're really at that. We're definitely not at that, even the halfway point for the season yet. So I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I was like, oh, of course he'd get his immortality. What he does with that, I'm going to be very interested to see. I mean, you know, immortality comes with its downsides too, because it's like, well, you can never die. That means you kind of have, well, it seems like Dreyfus doesn't really have many people left anyway. I mean, he did kind of betray his partner and kind of sell his partner, well, banish his partner to hell. But there was also that, it's kind of like a very sweet moment in the episode where Crane goes to visit Abby's grave, and he kind of, you know, he's talking to her, talking about these new things, like, oh, the fact is that her Gloria's Mets have to go up against the Chicago Cubs and stuff like that, or Bears, whatever. I'm not a sports dude. I apologize. So it's just kind of filling her in on stuff like that, and saying like how he's sorry that he hasn't visited her for a while, that he, you know, kind of, you know, decided to kind of take her up on the, you know, kind of get out there and make some changes. And he's like, oh, I moved to DC, Washington, DC, and I've got new friends and new allies now. And I've also got Miss Jenny, so you kind of don't have to worry about me, essentially. He's like, until we meet again. And he's like, you know that you will, I do miss you dearly, but I am no longer alone. I have good compatriots, and I have you, knowing, you know, that you'll always be with me. And I think that holds weight even more so because of Molly's, you know, circumstances. Like, you know, like I said, I feel like, you know, they're you know, like during the whole trial thing that monster put Crane through, it's like, you know, there's some parts of Abby hidden somewhere inside of Molly, so. But like I said, a very good episode, and I'm very interested to see where we go next episode, where this all takes us. And now moving on to this week's episode of Emerald City. A lot of stuff went down in this episode. Definitely a lot of stuff dealing particularly with the wizard. Okay, so basically he's gathering up children all across the town because he's trying to search out any witches that may exist, you know, that, you know, Glinda might have hidden amongst the people in the children in Emerald City. But to kind of be able to fully track them down, because there's no clear-cut way of determining who's a witch and who's not. Obviously, he does it on false pretenses, telling everyone, it's like, oh, it's like a medical situation. And it's like, obviously, he has his real motives being tracking down witches. So he gets West's help, but she's like, I don't want to help you, because it's like, basically in the circumstances as it is, she's like, screw both Glinda as well as screw as the wizard. Because Glinda lied about their mom's situation. She's been making other witches, like doing a lot of stuff behind her back, lying to her face about everything. Because it's like, because she also doesn't trust her sister, because it's like, her sister's the one that led all their other sisters to like fully charge against the beast. They're all dead, basically kind of because of Glinda, but also because of West herself, because she ends up bringing up the fact is that she kind of basically got rid of their fear, probably used a spell or something, get rid of their fear, kind of numb them to pain, to make them into like fearless and ready to charge at the beast. Which I kept seeing that wave of water. I'm like, what is that supposed to be? It's like, oh, is that a nightmare or something? What does that mean? And then I was like, oh, I get it. It's supposed to represent the beast. The beast takes on many different forms, and that's when it was in the form of water. And it was like a large tsunami with a whole bunch of witches drowning, which is kind of like, at the same time, it's like, that's kind of one of those, you know, I mean, not even just within the story, you know, in the confines of just kind of witches in general, like in the past during the Salem witch trials and stuff like that. It's like that's how you kind of deal with one of the ways you deal with the witch, you know, kind of like. I mean, you know, it's like witches are kind of associated with water. And I mean, when you actually look at the Wizard of Oz and think about the fact is that it was water that kind of melted the Wicked Witch. It's like, I didn't even think about that till now, too. It's like, that's such an obvious thing I should have thought about at the time. And also the fact is that witches aren't affected by fire. That's kind of interesting. Because West and that little girl walked through it like it was nothing. Once again, think about the Salem witch trials. It's like, what did they do to witches? Burn them at the stake. And it's like, oh, apparently fire doesn't do jack squat to them. But also, obviously, like I said, that's her reasoning. But also not to trust a wizard because it's like, you don't like magic. So it's like, you know, she doesn't say it, but outright she's like, no, you'd end up killing them. I know you would. Which the wizard's like, oh, I wouldn't do that. I just want to make sure that they're not used by Glinda. This episode also, you know, seeing what happened to her sisters, realizing the part she had to play in all the other witches dying, it does make you realize that why West does what she does, why she stays high all the time. I think that was what it was exactly like poppies. I think it was like she used poppies or whatever to kind of numb their pain, to kind of numb them to like not really think about anything, to kind of focus on their fear, to kind of release them of being afraid and stuff like that. Like I said, kind of just turning them into the perfect weapons. And to think about the fact that what she did to her own sisters, people she considered family. No wonder she does like kind of is the way she is, kind of saying hi all the time. But there's kind of an interesting thing about the whole, like, basically she's like, okay, if you find any witches, I'll work with you, wizard, but just find any witches, basically they'll let me take care of them. They won't go to Glinda, they'll come to me. Basically she'll look after them. And to me, I'm thinking it's obviously many different things. It could be her trying to replace the sisters that died because of her. It's like, or two, it's like, it could be, protect them from Glinda, because the fact is Glinda will just use them. I won't make that mistake again, but I can't trust that my sister won't use them as weapons in this war that she's trying to wage against the wizard. But maybe at the same time, too, maybe it's also about raising people to love her. It's like, oh, I'll raise you like I'm your mother, or, because it's like there are very few people that she had left in the world that loved her. The only person she had left was East, and like as you can see, it's not even a situation between her and North, because it's more hate than love. It's just like a lot of hate and distrust. And so maybe it'd be an opportunity to get someone to kind of love her, to kind of feel that hole in her heart. I mean, that's how I chalk it up. But when the time came, they ended up tracking down one of the girls. But sadly, the girl was a little, like, basically she saw the cage and, because basically West wanted to bring her back peacefully and stuff like that. But she got a little freaked out when she saw the cage, activated her powers and everything, and was starting to burn up. And then, she's trying to run away and everything, and West kind of captured her, and she kept burning in this hole and everything. Which, West, even Tip were like, no, we need to go back to her. But the wizard was like, no, we can't. Let's just go. Because everyone was up in arms. Obviously, people pissed at the wizard because obviously he lied about the circumstances of what he was up to. Plus, also, I think it was also people seeing what was happening between the girl and West, seeing that display of magic and all the destruction. It was, it was scary, and and you saw the wizard like, no, you can't go back for it. It's too late for both of us. We kind of have to lay in the bed that we've made and then walk away. And it almost seemed like there was almost a satisfied look on his face, and I was like, this was kind of like, it wasn't exactly what you wanted, but you kind of got what you wanted in the end, because now everyone's afraid of magic. And you see it, like, he's like, oh, magic is bad. We have to extinguish magic. Because he had never 100% decided what he was going to do with the High Council. But then he makes this noble speech about, the fact is that my High Council gave up their lives because they were trying to, this whole magic epidemic, they were trying to stop it. They were like, they knew the great evil that was coming for magic. Even going as far as saying, like, the fact is the beast of forever has taken on the form of witches. Also, sign that we ended up finding out that Anna did die last episode when he shot her. I was thinking, like, where he shot her, maybe she was still alive. Sadly, not the case. But going as far as telling a bold-faced lie like that, because it just reiterates what I brought up before. It's a situation where it's like, now it's clear-cut. Now you can't say that Glinda's 100% the good guy either, but definitely can't say the wizard is. And I love it. It's kind of, because I always was maybe you can't really tell. I mean, from the very beginning, he was already very antagonistic because of just the way he handles things, imprisoning people and just a ban on magic. But like I said, all this comes down to is control, because now he has control of the people. He has people who are willing to fight with him and stay by his side on anything. There might have been people who were like, "Oh, Matt, we shouldn't fear magic, because there was those who were still loyal to the thought of magic is a good thing, because magic is what was originally the heart of Oz." But as like last episode showed, it's like, and I've said just now, he's a control freak. He wants power himself, but it's like if magic's a thing, if it's allowed to continue to exist, it jeopardizes his position and his power. That's why he's so heavy and hard against magic. And it's like now he's got the people rallied behind him. Now he kind of has not just his soldiers, but the townspeople willing to fight Glinda because they fear, the evil that is witches they are the true form of the beast forever. The beast forever has taken on now. So, and now, there's few people out there who really know the truth. Obviously, Tip knows the truth, and so does West. West ended up killing the girl because basically when he got rid of his council, he ended up basically putting them in a pit with the girl, and basically her magic activated and burned all of them, but the magic was too much. Using so much of her power to do that ended up putting a strain on her body. It looked like it was kind of like a situation where like her body was already dying, or like she was basically in a severe lot of pain. It was almost like a comatose situation where it's just like her body was kind of reacting, I guess, to the magic, but she kind of lost consciousness. She's basically, her consciousness was probably slowly slipping away, so West tried to be merciful and just killed her so that she wouldn't be in pain anymore. But then there was the dagger that Tip had, originally got from Jack, because they were like, because originally Jack was like, "Oh, we could sell this," but Tip was like, "No, she didn't want any reminder of that place anymore." So he was like, "We just leave it." But he brought it along anyway, and now she has it. And she's like, he's like, the West is like, "Where'd you get that dagger?" And she's like, "It's mine." Basically, it came from a place that grew. Essentially, it's connected to some royal family, like a princess or something like that. And so it's like, is that who Tip really is? Is Tip actually some kind of princess that was supposed to be hidden away for whatever circumstances? Or could this be related to Dorothy? Either way, I mean, obviously, it could be either or, because obviously Dorothy's special in some regards. But definitely when you look at, well, I think Dorothy's kind of a circumstance. I mean, I was about to say it's kind of like a Once Upon a Time situation. I feel bad when I compare one show to another show, them both being fantasy shows. And I don't know, but I mean, it's a comparison of like, it's the best way I could communicate what I'm trying to get across. If anyone's watches Once Upon a Time, which if you don't, you should, is the fact is that she's more of a savior situation. So maybe my mind is kind of leaning more towards, Tip is actually a princess, hence the whole like hiding her true identity, making her look like a boy, because people would be looking for a princess, a girl. They wouldn't be looking for, a boy, because she doesn't know about her family and stuff like that. So seems like that might be one, especially if it was there in her house the entire time. So, and maybe West is looking at her like, kind of realizing maybe there's a lot more to Tip, and maybe Tip's realizing there's a lot more to herself too. So, but kind of going back to the wizard, like, even, what was her name, Elizabeth, she was like, I was the only one, the rest of everyone on your high council, they had no idea about this. I'm the only one that was reported to Glinda, even going as far as saying, like, no, Anna actually loved you, she actually cared about you, which we know is the truth, because she actually thought she was there to actually aid the wizard. She didn't know she was supposed to spy on him and stuff like that. She actually legitimately had feelings for him, but he was so, like I said, it's a situation where it's like when he feels that he's being challenged by someone, or obviously because he opened up his heart to her a little bit, and now he felt like he was being betrayed. But it's like she had no idea. It doesn't even seem like he's remorseful about it. He just, like I said, he made that blatant line of like, "Oh, my high council, they sacrificed themselves. Oh, this scourge that is the witches took them away." And it's like, dude, that just sucks. And you can sit up there and lie. Like I said, you've easily taken the path of antagonist. But like I also said, not like Glinda's 100% an angel too, doing the things that she's doing. Like, yes, she might have her reasoning for it, because it's like, but it's like in the circumstances that's coming, it's like, the beast is a problem, yet rather than being focused on that, you're both focused on each other. It's like Glinda wants to kill, or rather destroy, the wizard, and the wizard kind of wants to do the same thing to Glinda. Well, not just to Glinda, he pretty much wants to wipe out all witches, which her and West are the last of their kind, with the exception of the girls. So, but kind of quickly, kind of changing gears a little bit, I want to talk about something else that popped up in the episode, and that was the whole Jack storyline. At first, he's talking to Langolier, kind of trying to be sympathetic to her circumstances, but she gets super pissed at him, which is understandable. It's like a lot of stuff has happened. She lost her dad, and she feels like he's not really, because he's kind of saying quote unquote all the wrong things. Even though, I mean, there's no right thing to say in that situation. You're just trying to be there for someone, but it's like, probably for her, that's kind of a foreign concept, because it's like, as she brought up before, like, she grew up not really having any friends. She's kind of a sheltered kid. So for her, connecting with people most likely isn't the easiest thing. Plus, I think on the back of her mind, she's like, okay, it's like, oh, well, what about that tip girl? It's like, I think there was a hint of jealousy there too, because it's like the one person she's close to, and now there's someone else that's important to Jack too. So I guess that kind of messes with her head a little bit. But like I said, just her head's all over the place, because it's like now she has to take lead of her country. It's just so much responsibility and stuff put on her shoulders at the time where it's like her dad just died, and like now she has to like help out the wizard figure out this whole gun situation of like manufacturing weapons to fight against the witches or the beast, or whichever one he plans to use the guns for. I'm sure it's most likely for the witches, but it might also probably be used for taking down the beast forever as well. Nevertheless, so she basically dumps him in a forest, which he quickly, as he goes through, it's kind of like a screaming forest, and his body starts rusting, and he gets stuck there, and he's left alone until Princess Eve pops up and saves him by oiling him up. Literally turned into the weirdest thing, because it's like she's oiling him up and everything, and he's like, okay, just promise me you won't go above a certain area. He's like, you said you gave your word. She's like, as a lady, but I'm a queen now. And it's just like, okay, this scene just took a crazy turn. It's like, I don't even want to say it's weird or awkward. It's just like, wow, the implications is just what threw me away, especially his face and everything. I'm like, dude, can NBC really air that? That's like, I don't know. That seemed like legitimately some Game of Thrones stuff, which I've never really watched Game of Thrones. I am aware of Game of Thrones, and I feel like that's probably the biggest thing. It's like, you might, even if you don't watch Game of Thrones, you're aware of Game of Thrones, what goes on in that type. So that seemed like some Game of Thrones type of thing. Like, obviously it's kind of more PG, or at the very least PG-13 orientated, but at the same time, I know I went through a movie rating system rather than a TV rating system. I'm not really that familiar with, well, I am, but nevertheless, that's not the point. It's just, it kind of caught me off guard a little bit. Just that whole thing. And then especially later on when they're in her room and she takes off her top, I'm like, dude! It's like I said, I guess because I'm so old fashioned when it comes to TV. I'm like, can you do that on TV? You can't do that on channels like NBC, HBO, Cinemax, sure, but I mean, it's not like you saw anything. You just saw her back, but it's just like, wow. I mean, because truth be told, she wanted some, like, she's opening up to Jack, it's because, like, she was even willing to take off her mask, but Jack's like, you don't have to do that, It's because for her, it's like, she wanted someone to be there, like, someone to kind of see her for who she is. Like I said, like, she's complicated. Like, at the very beginning, I was like, oh, she seems very mean, just not a very good person, but then it's like, you see that there's a lot more to her than that. She is very complex, especially when you think about her past and like her upbringing and everything, all that's happened to her in a short amount of time too. I mean, she was already taking over royal duties because of her father being in the mental state that it was, but now it's just like, to have that person, the last person that you love, taken away from you, because she lost her mom years ago, and now at least she had her dad, no matter what his state of mind was, she still had her dad, but now he's gone too. And now it's just kind of a circumstance where Jack is there, and it's like, he sees her for who she really is. And I was actually kind of curious. I was like, it still bothers me. Like, what is underneath those masks? Why do you wear masks to hide your face? And I thought we were about to get an answer, but it's like, no, because Jack doesn't want her to do that, because that's something, it's kind of a situation where it's like, she chooses to be like that, and it's like, he doesn't want her to kind of feel like she has to, it's something for herself that she chooses not to show to the world. So it's kind of like, don't ever feel like you need to show that to me. Like, even without you showing me that, like, I know who you really are. Like I said, because you see that kind-heartedness in her. It's just like I said, once again, very complicated. And then finally, we're going to talk about the whole circumstance with Dorothy, Lucas, and Sophie. It's kind of a circumstance of, obviously, Dorothy hasn't been honest about everything. Eventually, she tells Lucas everything. Granted, it kind of backfired because of the whole Sophie being able to hear everything. Which is, I still, hopefully we get some answers for that next episode, her whole hearing aid situation. Like, what the point was that kind of blocking her off from the rest of the world. Obviously, like, Dorothy kind of helped her kind of focus a little bit more because, like, she kept her ears blocked for so long. And now it's just like, when you unblock her ears, it's like all the sound is hitting her all at once. And so she was kind of freaking out the first time Dorothy took them out. But this time, Dorothy's there to kind of help her kind of focus a little bit more and everything. And so, essentially, Dorothy kind of, gets close to both Sophie and Lucas, but Lucas is like, you shouldn't do that because, like, obviously we're going to have to give her over to Glinda, and Sophie's like, and Dorothy's like, no, we're not. Why would we do that? We can't trust her. The fact of the matter is, like, we don't even know her. The fact that she's going to ask this little girl to go to war, to fight, it's like we don't know her, and she obviously doesn't have good intentions. I mean, there are even points where she was like, oh yeah, the wizard's not as bad as you think, and it's like, well, obviously you have your reasons for, like, even she knows that's not 100% true, because even she knows, like, the wizard's pretty bad. Even she can kind of, like, even with that story he told her last episode, even she can kind of see through some of the stuff he told her, like, obviously it's not everything, and that he's not the best person. So even she knows there's a lot more to him, but it's a situation where it's like she has to put her faith in him because he's the only one that can get her home, especially because he knows her and he knows her mom. I mean, but at the end of the day, let's call her Lucy. Dorothy, all Dorothy is kind of a means to an end to him, for him. Because I thought the point was, like, to have Sophie go with them because I thought Sophie was going to be the weapon they end up using against Glinda, but it turns out not to be the case. Maybe it's just because, I don't know, because really Dorothy doesn't even really want to kill Glinda. She already made that obvious, pretty clear last episode, but she kind of reiterates this episode. If she has to, she will, but she doesn't want to. But even Lucas is like, then why get close to me and Sophie if you know you're just going to up and leave us? It's basically because she was like, I want you to stay behind and help Sophie. It's like, but the fact is I have to get back to my family, like, her adoptive parents. And he's like, well, what about us? And she's like, they came first, which immediately bites her in the ass, at the end of the episode. But Sophie kind of turns the house upside down. I was wondering, well, is that Glinda doing that? But I was like, it's Sophie, isn't it? Because we haven't seen her have any interaction, because everyone else is flipping and turning while the whole house is turning, but we don't see her doing or saying anything. It's basically because, kind of once again, kind of because, I guess it's a circumstance where it's like, Dorothy thought, Sophie was asleep and she went over here to conversation. But, you get where Dorothy's coming from, because it's like she needs to go back home. And she's stuck in a situation where it's like she wants to look after Sophie because she doesn't want to give Sophie to Glinda because it's like, she'll just use her as a weapon. But the fact is, I can't stay here and look after her. It's just like she cares for Sophie, but at the same time, it's like she has to get back home for her family's sake. So she also wanted Lucas to kind of be there to kind of take care of her. But it's also at the same time, it's like she has feelings for Lucas. But, sadly, it turns out at the end that doesn't matter. Because the moment they show up, Glinda kisses him. And then he's like, oh, Glinda. And they start making out even more. So it seems more like, I was wondering what their relationship was going to be. And it's like, apparently, it's a relationship. It's like they are close. Like, I'm sure next episode we'll get more of a look at it. But it's a situation where Lucas is like, please give essentially leniency is kind of the word he used. Basically, don't hurt Dorothy or something. Kind of let her slide, even though she was sent here to kill you. He's like, I'm sorry, Dorothy, but they came first. Now, when he says they, is he referencing Sophie and Glinda or Glinda and her people? It seems like it more so than Glinda and her people. Because at the end of the day, it's like, where does even Sophie stand now? Because now that he's got his memories back, he's no longer Lucas. He's Rowan, the person he was before. The one that Glinda kind of put on this mission in the first place. So he probably won't even look at Sophie as a situation like, oh, I care for Sophie. It's more like, no, Sophie's part of my duty. I will protect her simply because that's the job I was given to by Glinda. Maybe the next episode we kind of find out what led to them work. Because obviously he works for the wizard, but now he was also secretly working with Glinda. Obviously, it doesn't seem like it's just working. Like, how did they cross paths is what I'm curious about. It might be a situation where Glinda's like, oh, don't worry, I can get you home. It's like, I'll go ahead and send you home. Because the thing is, Dorothy had a change of mind because she's like, you know what? The fact of the matter is, I can make you get you guys to come with me. It's like I won't have to worry about leaving you behind if I just bring you with me. And it's like now that kind of doesn't matter because in one moment everything changed. It's like with that one kiss, Rowan got all his memories back, and now he's no longer Lucas but Rowan. And now Dorothy doesn't have him, and it's like probably her plans to talk to Glinda are kind of up in the air now. I mean, makes you wonder how much does Glinda know about her? Just so many questions that come about. I'm very curious to see where this all goes next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.